Hi, welcome back to Massenet. This week we're going to be talking about the films Gaslight and Sunset Boulevard. So Anna, if you want to kick it off with Gaslight.
Yeah, so Gaslight is it's a Gothic film, and it's about this woman who marries this man after like a 2-week whirlwind romance, and they move back to her old London home from when she was younger, where her aunt got murdered in, and they never were able to solve the murder. And then she lives in the house with her husband, and he's just very controlling, doesn't want to go outside. And then she notices all these weird things going around, like the lights flickering, she hears footsteps, and she is supposedly going crazy. And the husband is feeding into it, and so is the maid, and Angela Lansbury. And should I spoil it? Should I spoil?
It's kind of impossible to talk about it without spoiling it.
I don't know if I can spoil it or not, but the husband's, he's what we call now gaslighting, which is where this term comes from. He's gaslighting her into thinking she's going insane, so he can snoop through all of her aunt's stuff to find these like really expensive jewels. Turns out he also murdered the aunt, and he had this whole concocted scheme to find her niece and marry her and move into the home to find the jewels they never found when he tried to murder the aunt.
Just some dedication.
And Sunset Boulevard was directed by Billy Wilder. It's a film from the 1950s, and it's about this broke, out of work screenwriter named Joe, whose car breaks down in the driveway of this kind of old, seemingly abandoned mansion. And when he goes inside, he sees that old silent film actress named Norma lives there with her servant Max. And Norma's planning her big comeback to Hollywood. And she kind of entraps Joe because she financially supports him, and they start a relationship together. And then when Norma's comeback to the big screen doesn't go exactly as planned, things kind of go awry, and she ends up killing Joe, and Max is revealed to be Norma's husband, and plot twist. So Sunset Boulevard is also a movie kind of, noir framed as Gothic framed as noir. So we're going to be talking about how these two genres kind of intermix with each other in these two movies. So if anyone wants to kick off the discussion.
Well, there's definitely already a connection in the lighting, I think, because both films are in black and white. So obviously with the lighting, you're always going to have the shades of gray and, black when you really want to make an impact with shadows. But there's a way in which they light things. Like one thing I really noticed in Gaslight, which really drew me attention, was just the way that the light colors and the dark colors were really used to symbolize like good and evil and feeling healthy and feeling unwell. Because for Paula, the woman who's being driven crazy, whenever she's wearing a dark outfit, it's always when she's really falling into her husband's like idea that he put in her head of like, I'm crazy. And then when she's wearing light, like mostly a white outfit, like a fancy outfit, she's like, I'm good. I can go out in public. I'm a normal person. I'm not going crazy. Like, I'm not a kleptomaniac. I'm not losing stuff all the time. Like, I'm not nuts. And so really just the way that they use like kind of like their limited color palette to symbolize the good and evil and Gaslight, and then the shadows, which are just added on top of like the dark, like it's not just outfits, obviously, like shadows used with that too.
Yeah, to add on to the lighting thing, at the one particular scene that like kind of stuck out to me with that whole like playing with light, what's the term, chiaroscuro, the light painting, was when Paula, the detective figure, kind of he finds the husband Gregory. He figures him out and he ties him to the chair, and then Paula, she's walking through this kind of really dark room, and she goes into the part of the house that was boarded up where she wasn't allowed, and she's like in the dark still, and then when she opens the door, she's suddenly illuminated, like the scene is suddenly well lit, and like so it's kind of going from her being in this kind of dark place that people in film noir usually are when they're like unknowing of the crime, and then once she kind of is informed of what's really happening and the reality of her situation, and the lighting switches to reflect that, which I thought was like kind of a nice noir-esque touch in this topic.
Totally. One scene that I wrote down was the scene where Greg and Paula first go into her aunt's house, which is kind of a similar thing. It was like right basically throughout the whole beginning-ish of the movie, and then the moment they arrive to this house, it's like, even though there's windows and stuff, you know, it's like a pretty dark kind of, mysterious style of lighting. And then in Sunset Boulevard, I noticed that they did like a very similar kind of setting for the house. Like it was kind of like overflowed with items and stuff, and kind of made it pretty dark, you know? So I thought that was like a very noirish parallel.
Yeah. In Gaslight as well, something about like, I guess it's still lighting or symbolism, whatever you want to call it, is they kind of make it a point to show Gregory lighting the gas for like the lamp. So like it's kind of like he's in control, like he controls the narrative type thing. Like when you have like hermetic crime in film noir, they kind of do all these convoluted things to like make them in control and like to kind of lead the story in the way that they want it to present to the rest of the public. And so I thought that was kind of interesting, like a little pun, I guess. He's like lighting the gas. He's like controlling what is illuminated when. So
also film noir kind of flips what Gaslight and like what I'm assuming other Gothics did, but I haven't seen any. It's, you know, we're watching Gaslight from the oblivious bystander, in this case the victim's point of view, and then for film noir you're seeing it from like the people committing the crime's point of view. You're following them, and so you kind of end up rooting for the bad guy in film noir, because like that's the characters you're made to like kind of have a relationship with. But for Gaslight, you're like, you hate the bad guy. I mean, obviously he's also like emotionally torturing his wife, that sucks, but because you're not following him along on his like motive, you're not rooting for him to get the jewels, you're not rooting for him to get away and, you know, succeed and get all
very
this money.
disappointed he didn't die at the end.
yeah,
I wanted to stab him so bad. He just did.
Yeah,
And
especially
then
after making her seem crazy for everything too. I was like,
Justice for Paula.
He just pulls like very cruel and very petty things of like, you know, like when he's sort of like when he says, you know, like, oh, we'll be going out to the theater tonight, when really it's just a setup to get her hopes up about the theater, and then he takes it away from her. I'm just like, girl, shoot him.
It's like your parents telling you they're gonna get you a puppy and then they take you to the dentist instead. It sucks.
Yeah, and sort of like he would be, and like Gregory would be the guy that we would follow in a noir, like sort of like, you know, trying to pull one over on his new wife, and we would sort of like see that. We'd either be following him, or we would be following Gaslight's sort of like pseudo inspector figure, which is the good guy that gets sort of like, that gets himself involved and gets himself dragged into this. We don't see him much in Gaslight because it's not a noir, but sort of like we can see sort of like that figure of sort of like an initial outsider who then gets himself very personally and very deeply entrenched, sort of like carries over from the modern Gothic into noir later.
Yeah, well, also I think just the actions Gregory takes is completely, I think, way worse than the actions we've seen noir people take. And by people, I mean like the protagonist / antagonist, and then also just like the people that also end up just screwing everything up. Even though they murder people in noir, they don't emotionally torture them and break them down as people to the point where they're just like, yeah, take me to town, I'm ready to go, like ready to give up everything. Like they don't break people down as who they are. They're just like, yeah, just kill somebody. And somehow that seems better.
Yes.
Like murder better than what this guy
and often
did.
Like they maintain that level of like familiarity and trust and that positive relationship up until the murder happens.
Yeah.
So like, you know, you still have like those like, you know, like the person sort of like assumes they're on good terms and the death comes as a shock. Whereas like, you know, in Gaslight, like she was miserable the whole time and there was no shock of death, which like I'm glad she's alive, but you know.
I know. And then also it's like, I feel like for noir, they have this little inner person in them that's telling them that what they're doing is bad. And then Gregory's just sucks and he has no conscience, like he has no like moral compass. I will say, once I saw his eyebrows, I knew I shouldn't trust him. A man with those eyebrows cannot be trusted. So like, but he has just no moral compass. And then like film noir guys, at least they're like, I probably shouldn't be doing this, but I have a reason, and like I need the money, or like I'm in this tough spot. And then it's like, oh, he's like, no, I'm gonna murder somebody. I want some jewels.
Or if he does have a moral compass, we don't see it because we're not with him. We're with Paula.
I was gonna say exactly, if there was like voiceover, or like he was the main character and it was like film noir, then this one was Gaslight. If it was like film noir, then we might see him differently. Since in film noir we like stick with the main characters even though they're usually committing a crime.
Yeah, we were very much on the outside this time. It's like last film, we were like very much on the outside, like spectating along with like everybody else, even though we like knew what was happening. We didn't get that like psychological element of like being able to like get on his level kind of.
And then for Sunset Boulevard, I can't quite tell if we were completely on the inside or also kind of in the dark for Sunset Boulevard, because it's a bit different than other film noirs, but it's definitely Gaslight being completely on the outside is completely different than how film noir approaches it, where at least you have, if you're on the outside of what's occurring, at least you're on the inside of what's happening in the main character's mind, because you usually have a voiceover. Can I help you tell the story?
Yeah, and in Gaslight, it felt like, at least there were points where I had like no idea at all like what was gonna happen, you know, whereas in film noir, like with the voiceover usually and being like going with the main character, we have like some sense of what their intentions are, like what's going on.
Yeah. And we do get like, we don't get sort of like a through line of like the noir voiceover in Sunset Boulevard as much as we get in like other films like Double Indemnity. The voiceover was like constant, but to a degree we do get it in sort of like opening shot. We see Joe dead in the pool. We know that by the time we get to the end, Joe's gonna be dead in the pool. So we, to a degree, we do know how it's going to end. Gaslight doesn't give us that same sort of like, here's where we're gonna end up.
Yeah. I mean, I think now, because Gaslight's become like a really, especially at college campuses, a really well-used term. It's just a little shade at Clark. But I think it's become a really well-used, like overused term in a lot of sense, the term gaslight. So I think everyone kind of has an idea of what the whole plot of Gaslight is, like just the general idea of like some guy gaslights some other person. I don't even think they like know it's his wife or whatever, but to know like how deep it goes in, give me 1 second for this little rant. I think to know how deep in the actual film the gaslighting goes, for people just to be like, you're gaslighting me, when you say like, no, it's like, let's just watch the film and see how far he took Paula to like the bone as a person, and then we can use the term gaslight if you want.
I mean,
to.
like as a psych major watching Gaslight, like I can see why the psychological community at the time saw this movie and was like, oh shit, we're gonna use that, like that's gonna be our word for the next, because I was watching this and I was just like, this is like surprisingly detailed and accurate emotional psychological manipulation and like abusive behavior for, you know, like a movie from this era, because usually like we've seen primarily noir. I can't speak to 40s and 50s Gothic movies, but a lot of these movies are like very dramatic, very camp, and so like there were moments like that in Gaslight, admittedly, but like a lot of like Gregory's actions and how he treated Paula and how he manipulated her was very subtle and very realistic. Like I was watching it and I was very impressed. I'm like, okay, I can see why, you know, like we've been obsessed with the concept from this movie in the field for like the past however knows.
And Paula's deterioration, because I had to watch Bewitched for the 2,000 word essay we did. We had to compare the two movies, and when they showed like a crazy woman, she just like stood like with a weird face and like smiled really big, and that was supposed to like mimic crazy. And then for this one, like instead of seeing her just like be bug-eyed and like, yes, I'm crazy, it was like, you know, you see like her hair kind of get messier, and you see her just kind of slumped more, and she moves slower, and she's just exhausted. And again, like going back to like the dark clothes that was worn, it's like it's a more realistic, like what you'd actually see as somebody just being deteriorated throughout all like what's happening to them.
Was she wearing black when she like went crazy in public at like the dinner or something?
She was wearing white for that.
Oh, she was
wearing white because she went to the event all hopeful. Like,
okay,
yeah.
That makes sense.
And then he pulls out the pocket watch. He's like, "You took my watch." And then she's like, "No, I didn't." And he's like, "You did." hated that man. I
I
hated him.
genuinely thought there were like ghosts during the whole movie. I thought that's what it was gonna end to. Like, she's not actually crazy. There's just actually ghosts.
You didn't
Husband's just
eyebrow?
No, I didn't notice.
Hold it.
But yeah, it seems like from there on, it's definitely darker.
Yeah.
Too.
Aside from the what did we say, the detective figure in Gaslight, like kind of serving as a predecessor to these PIs that we have in Noir. We also had the lady on the train who was like obsessed with true crime, and she was like, I love myself a good murder. And she was like, she said like something about like, you know, this guy married this woman and then they found out that there was bodies in the basement, and she was like kind of, I don't know where she would fit in the archetype, unsuspecting bystander or something, but she's dancing around the crime that is just about to happen unbeknownst, and she's like kind
it's
of
like even more unsuspecting.
Yeah, and she's like basically kind of telling Paula like her fate, like, hey, this innocent woman like marries this guy and then he has this really dark past and like kills people, and like this house is really creepy. And she's like, isn't this such a fun book? And then Paula's like, yeah, like get me off this train. But then that just ends up being what happens in this movie. So like I think that the characters in this film kind of like set up the archetypes that we see in like noir in that way. I just thought the lady on the train was like really funny, and also the fact that she met Paula 1 month ago and then she keeps knocking on her door and she's like, we're friends, like, can I come see her? Like, we're friends. I talked about murder with her one time on the train. Can I?
She keeps on trying to like get into this house of like,
Exactly.
can I see the house where the murder happens?
The lady on the train is the PI. She's the one. She is the one trying to get inside that house and solve the crime.
I mean, I feel like that's kind of like a reference to unsuspecting, and like it's like constantly knocking on your door, you know.
And then sort of like, you know, in the thing of like, because we talked a while ago about how, you know, like the idea of like true crime reporting tying into how information about the crimes that happen in the plot of a noir movie, noir film get portrayed to the audience. And it's funny because sort of like we get the true crime reporting in, you know, like actual noirs when we get to that point. And then in the Gothic film, we have this character who's the true crime consumer. And she's the one sort of like, you know, obsessed with murder, obsessed with crime, and trying to get into the crime scene, even at the very obvious discomfort of the woman whose aunt was murdered.
I know, and I can't tell if she was allowed into the house, if Gregory wasn't like, no. If she was allowed into the house, if she would have figured it out because she's such a true crime fan, or if because she's kind of like cuckoo, she would have been like, everything's fine. Like, because I know she points out to like the cop or no, like the detective when he walks up to her, she's like, it's so weird. She comes in and out, but then she's like, here, birdies, have some bread. Like, I can't tell if she would have put 2 and 2 together.
If she was allowed inside that house, like the first time she tried, the movie would be like 20 minutes long. Like she would walk in and be like, oh, he's crazy. Like, I've read enough true crime to like suss him out. And then the movie would
like,
maybe she's like
that's why she wasn't allowed in the house. They needed it for like.
Maybe she's like a sort of like a Keys figure, you know, from Double Indemnity. She's the Keys of this movie.
Lady on the train carried the movie.
It's like what my mom says about Disney movies. Like, if the mom was still alive in a Disney movie, none of that would have happened.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah. If all the had mothers, they'd be fine.
So, oh yeah, I was gonna say about like the characters, like how we talked about the archetypes that appear in Gaslight. How they also appeared in Sunset Boulevard, but as a Gothic, as a noir, paying tribute to a Gothic, they were gender flipped, which I thought was just really interesting, and how instead of being like in Gaslight where the man is like holding power and agency over the woman, it is this crazy woman holding power over the man, which I don't know, I thought that was like really noteworthy to like in this film. I thought it really
would Norma, I want to say Nora always.
Norma.
Would you guys consider Norma a femme fatale?
You know, I was thinking about this actually, because like when whenever I saw her, I was just sort of like, does she count? But then, like when you see her, like not really, sort of like, superficially, I guess, because she is sort of like, she's a woman who manipulates the male protagonist, which is like one part of like what the femme fatale does. But sort of like when I was thinking about it, I'm just sort of like, I mean, I guess sort of like in that sense, maybe, but like if we're comparing her to other femme fatales that we've seen, like, Phyllis in Double Indemnity, Helen Grail from Murder My Sweet, etc., she doesn't really have the same sort of, because I think like one big thing is that like Jo always has this initial aversion to her. And usually when the noir PI or the noir male protagonist encounters the femme fatale, there isn't that aversion. He's sort of like, he's immediately taken in by her. And Jo is like, has never really under the impression that Norma is completely harmless or completely benign. She always comes across as a bit like crazy to him. But I will say that sort of like, if we're talking about how, like this is a noir film that kind of echoes the Gothic, because we've got that sort of noir element of this sort of like, like charismatic and like beautiful, because like Norma was formerly beautiful, formerly this very glamorous star manipulating this man, but she takes on more of the sort of like the characteristics of like the Gothic spouse villain. I don't know how to phrase that, because sort of like she's trapping him in this sort of like very extravagant, very isolated house, making sure he doesn't leave, sort of like making him dependent on her. So it's sort of like the noir element of the woman manipulating the man, but then the sort of like Gothic horror element of, an obviously very threatening and very sort of like spooky antagonistic figure.
Well, also both kind of approach the topic of a man being reliant on a woman financially, but differently. Because Gregory is reliant on Paula financially, but that's because he doesn't have a job, he's a criminal, and he lives in her family home, and he wants to steal her family's jewels, so he needs to like have all of her. And then Norma has Jo, is that his name?
Yeah.
Too many names. And then Norma has Jo trapped financially because Jo is just this poor screenwriter whose car doesn't even work, and he's like, well, I guess I'll be a sugar baby. I guess.
Sugar baby. Jo the sugar baby.
Norma the sugar.
I think it was like, I think I wrote at one point in my notes while I was watching Sunset Boulevard, I'm just sort of like, damn, Jo doesn't appreciate his sugar mommy.
No, he does.
I know, if I did that, I would have just stuck around. I'm like, okay.
Honestly, she got him whatever he wanted. He didn't appreciate her. I would appreciate Norma as a sugar mama.
I would have filmed the movie for her. I would have done it all with her money, but I would have done it all.
Yeah. Because like this woman has money. She is like she's fine.
Me and Max would have made Salome happen, and everything would have been fine.
I think it's probably because he's a screenwriter and her screenplay was so bad. Just like no.
Suck up a bad screenplay. I had to read so many of those in Screenwriting 101.
Yeah.
Speaking of Max, I don't even know if we were speaking of Max. I want to speak of Max though.
Yeah, we can't not speak of Max. Let's speak of him.
Is he? What slot would he fall into in the, I guess, noir genre? Because I was kind of thinking about how he really kind of orchestrated everything. He really kind of made it so that the narrative could fit Norma's delusions of still being a 1920s big screen star. Like without him kind of pulling strings, then that this kind of narrative that Norma was able to build in this like false reality really wouldn't have existed. Like he was really kind of creating this like perfect dreamscape where she could live in ignorant bliss and like not have the outside world and reality touch her in any way. So I think that like he was just a really just like paramount character to like building like what I thought made this movie one of the best we've watched in this class.
Well, I related him to Gregory in the terms of manipulating, because instead of telling her the honesty of like, hey, you're not famous and you're old, like live off your money, but you're old and you have no clout anymore. He's like, let me tell her she's gorgeous and she's still this beautiful star, and I'm going to write her love letters from fake fans, and I'm just going to feed into her delusions. And so he's kind of like, he's a better version of Gregory, because Gregory is causing her to feel crazy versus Max is like just feeding into the crazy.
Yeah.
crazy used colloquially, not clinically.
I feel like
But
he's the missing puzzle for Norma to be a femme fatale. Like, them mixed together would create a femme fatale.
Yeah, because I feel like the thing with femme fatales is that a big thing about them is that they take pride in the control that they have over the people in their lives and the manipulation of like the actions around them. But Norma kind of lacks that agency because she lacks that sanity, that like of realizing truly like reality, never mind how to manipulate it in a way that benefits her. So like if she can't even realize what decade it is, how is she going to be able to fabricate this entire world in which, you know, she's the best star of all time? I think like Max was really kind of the puppet master behind all of it, even though he was like entranced by her still, and it forced him into like this role.
And also, like, I think additionally, perhaps spicy take, but sort of like that one figure in, you know, like the Gothic romance that comes up a lot of sort of like the head of the house, the head maid, the housekeeper, etc. Sort of like Max to a degree, like if we're thinking of, you know, like Jo as the gender swapped noir Gothic, you know, protagonist, then sort of like what, you know, like the sort of like malignant, kind of like forbidding housekeeper would be to the new wife in a Gothic, Max is to Jo in Sunset Boulevard. And like the roles are different, but sort of like if we're thinking purely of like dynamics and sort of like how they interact superficially, sort of like he does seem to fill that role a little bit. I'd say like where it differs and sort of like where it's a little bit more like, you know, what makes it a little bit more noir is sort of like, in addition to being sort of like he is the manipulator and he is feeding like Norma lies a little bit, but also additionally he's sort of like Jo's source of information on like the truth of the situation, because a lot of the reality of like Norma's sort of like life and her false reality he gets from Max. Like when he comes back from that New Year's Eve party, when he drives back and Max is waiting for him ominously in the garage, and he sort of like gives him sort of like the lowdown of sort of, you know, like, listen, like you can't be doing this, like this is Norma's situation, this is what I'm doing to sort of like keep her stable, and I need you to work with me. Like the thing about him being Norma's first husband, her ex-husband, that comes from Max himself. So instead of like obfuscating things for Jo and sort of like going along with the delusion of this like isolated, weird Gothic world, he's giving sort of like these sort of like crumbs of truth and these sort of like glimpses into the reality of the situation that Jo wouldn't be able to get from anyone else.
Yeah. Max the puppet master, man.
Well, Max also like fixes everything at the end by getting her to come downstairs. Like he has all the news people pretend to be true. And I was watching that, I had a tear. I was like,
I love that scene.
You put up with so much bullshit. Max out with so much crap. And he's like, still like till the very end, he's like, Norma, you're gorgeous. Come down the stairs. You're a queen.
Direct her downfall.
And she's like, she gives like this like horrendously crazy face at the very end. Like that face, I was like, huh. And then there's like Max who's like, you're gorgeous, my queen. And she's like, yes.
Yeah.
I felt really bad for just like the both of them. Like I remember like in some scenes I was watching, I'm just sort of like, God damn it. I'm just like, I'm hurting.
Yeah.
Very pity every character. Like there's no character come out and you're like, you suck. And then in like Gaslight, you come out and you're like, you hate Gregory and you feel so bad for Paula and you really appreciate the detective. You also kind of hate Nancy. Nancy did rub me the wrong way.
Yeah, I don't know what it was about her. Maybe I was seeing some like subtext in the film, but whenever she came up, I was like, "You're doing something. I don't know what you're doing, but you're doing it."
So I googled it because I saw Angela Lansbury in the credits, and I was like, "Who does she play?" And then I looked into like the maid, like Nancy that she plays, and basically Nancy is supposed to be just some like tramp who like flirts with every man, and then just is kind of like a woman hater in a way. Like she just she just loves being a flirt because she flirts with Gregory, she flirts with the cops, like any cop that's on that beat she's flirting with, and she just hates her mistress. I mean, granted, she's basically like, I mean, she's a servant and she's working like this like really low level job, but she doesn't hate Gregory who tells her all the things she does. She hates the mistress who is too afraid to even ask her to do anything. So she's just supposed to be some like trashy woman who hates other women, from what I understand from my quick Google dive. I don't know. I just got really intrigued on the
More about Sunset Boulevard and how it's like Gothic. I don't know if we've talked much about like the actual mansion itself and how it's just like, granted it's not abandoned and then like moved into by the couple as like most Gothics are, but it is by all means full of dead things. It is full of this woman's dead career that she is desperately trying to like keep life into. It's like very like necrophilic in a way that she's like just like sitting there surrounded by like photos of all this like false fame that she believes that she still has. And it was like, I don't know, there was a line where they described it. It said it felt like a creeping paralysis out of beat with the rest of the world, and I think that that's like just like perfectly encapsulates how just like uneasy the whole place like made me feel even while watching it. I can't imagine how Joe must have felt like living there, like being kind of suffocated by this woman's insanity, basically.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
also a very Gothic line.
It's a giant for her career is what it
Exactly.
is. Like, and then she's like she points out all these like magnificent things to Joe to like brag about how great it used to be. She's like, Valentino danced on this floor. She's like, I had the ceiling flown in from another country. But it's like there's photos and flowers. Like it's like what you would see at a funeral for a person, but it's for her like her past life as like this like silent film star.
Yeah, it's like a shrine, literally.
Yeah. It's kind of gross. I don't know. Made me feel
And then also like the detail of when, you know, because she's got her own little movie theater in there behind this extravagant oil painting, and sort of like, you know, when Joe is there and they have screenings together, they have little movie nights, but it's only her films. She will not watch anything else, just silent films, only where she's the star, which
performances for Joe that were so creepy, like when she dressed up as Charlie Chaplin.
When she walked out with like the Hitler stash, I was like, this is not happening. I was like,
well, also like it is the Chaplin stash. That's sort of like it's unfortunate. It's sort of like, yeah, Charlie had it first, but you know.
I mean, Charlie Chaplin ended up making fun of Hitler. He redeemed kind of, but like, oh, it is a Hitler stash, isn't it?
She like walked out and I'm like, oh, that's not what I thought she was gonna do.
Like I knew because she was going back to the silent film era and like her performance that it was Chaplin, but I was like, girl, we gotta pick a different person.
I also like
sorry, go.
Oh yeah, that just sort of like the performances were sort of like part of that thing of like very, you know, like when I was watching that scene, I'm just sort of like, do I laugh or shudder? It was just very like, you know, very uncomfortable in like a very visceral way.
I cringed back I was like in the last row of Razzo, and I'm just like I was trying to get further back. I was so uncomfortable with what he was doing.
Yeah, usually I watch the films and I'm like leaning back in my chair, but like by the end of it I had like my notebook and I was like sitting here like this and I was like, what is going to happen next? Like my eyes were like the size of saucers. I was like, this woman cannot surprise me anymore. And then she like creepily approached me, thinking she's gonna like jump through the screen.
I know. That last shot, I was all the way back in my chair.
Girl, I was like
closer.
Viscerally uncomfortable.
No, her performance was great. Like Norma Desmond, like hands down my favorite character from all the films we've seen.
Yeah, Norma Desmond is an icon, but creepy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd love to be her strength, like the strength they give her at like if she like today, you know, goes to prison and they have to give you the shrink because you're like a prisoner that did something because you're nuts, and like I just want to be the one that's like, so why did you? I just want to understand everything that's it.
What's going on up there? I think
and sort of like in relation to like you know, this is a film noir, sort of like echoing the Gothic, and sort of like in relation to the house and this very weird, you know, like out of time world that she's created of sort of like, you know, because we have like the literal spooky mansion up in the Hollywood Hills to compare to the you know, like the spooky mansion that the Gothic couple move into. So we've got that's literal. But sort of like this other thing of sort of like, you know, we're going into the Gothic world. That's we can sort of like see it in sort of like you've got the new Hollywood of the 40s, 50s, and then you've got the old Hollywood of the silent film era 20s.
So
she said she was frozen.
Elena
so.
froze because after 30 minutes that tends to happen on the Wi-Fi, but she'll be right back.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but sort of like you've got these two Hollywoods almost like transposed on top of each other, and the old Hollywood is sort of like haunting the new one through the memory of the people who were there to experience it. Like I think of one thing that I think of is sort of that scene where they go to visit DeMille, the director that Norma's trying to pitch her new like Salome screenplay to. And while she's in there and she's sort of like reveling in all of these like actors saying, you know, like, oh my gosh, it's Norma Desmond, Norma's back. You've got Max and Joe out in the parking lot, and like Max is sort of like pointing out, you know, like all of these new offices for the people who like read and edit the screenplays. He's sort of, you know, like all of that was, you know, like Norma's dressing room back in the day, and you know, like where these offices are now, this was here, and where this was here. And all of this stuff. And I don't know, you can sort of like see this thing. It's sort of like almost like the idea of, you know, like ghosts in noir, ghosts in Gothic, of sort of like oftentimes the ghosts are not literal. They're sort of like created by the spouse and created by these things, sort of like haunt the protagonist. And it's sort of like, again, sort of like this is the ghost of for Sunset Boulevard, of like this old Hollywood that's still there through the people who experienced it, even though like the new Hollywood is here and it's here to stay.
It reminds me, I'm gonna bring true crime back into this week. We're connected to this week. There's this case of the murder of William Desmond Taylor, who was this like really big star at the time that this would have taken place, like the silent film into this era of like when the movie was filmed. Murdered by not by her, but his murder was caused by this actress from this time period who couldn't let go of the fact that she was no longer famous. Like she was so desperate to be famous again, but it just was not working out, that she fell into like life of crime, and that life of crime got her former friend from her silent film era murdered, because she's like, well, he's still famous because he's the producer and he has money and I want his money. But William Desmond Taylor, and it was like a whole unsolved case for like 80 years. And it's wild, but I just listened to a podcast about it. Watching this film, I was like, oh my God, wait a minute. I was like, I need to re-listen to that podcast now with like this movie in mind.
It's funny how Norma Desmond, and then you say his name was like William Desmond.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't think that has any connection.
I don't know like how much they would have, or like how much information about this case would have been out at the time that, you know, Billy Wilder was, you know, like working on this movie, on this film.
His murder was like one of the most famous Hollywood murders at the time, but it was unsolved, which was like the best thing.
So like, yeah, at the time it would have been something that people like would have been speculating on.
Yeah,
I'm
right now.
So I think we've like touched upon a lot of like the Gothic elements of, I guess, like this noir. Like we have the isolation, like she gets his car towed and he's like stuck with her, sugar baby status. And then you have like things appearing, I guess, like things happening, like his stuff just appears. Or like it floods and then he's forced to move into the main house. Like things are happening and it's like kind of like something's funky type thing.
Just getting dragged into this vortex. But it was
like the creepy nature of the house itself too. It's just like he's sucked into like this different world. Also, the monkey, I don't know how much there is
the chimpanzee funeral.
But I don't know how much there is to say about this monkey, but like I just want to just give him a little bit of like light, that poor animal, what he must have gone through living with Norma, how many Charlie Chaplin Hitler stash shows that monkey had to see. But
also
I think
the fact that we opened with that, and then, you know, like you've got Joe like living in like the little like garage room, and he just looks out his window and he's just like, oh, they're burying the chimpanzee just another night.
It's funny how like one pet died and then another pet moved in. Like Norma immediately got like her new monkey, like dance monkey dance.
Oh my God.
Justice for the monkey.
Okay. Justice for the monkey. But I googled, and it is true. The William Desmond Taylor case was referenced, like purposely referenced in Sunset Blvd. This is our fun fact for the week. I'm so sorry. I'm great.
And Billy Wilder, true crime fan.
it was a way to resonate with the wildly publicized scandals of almost 30 years prior.
Huh.
Interesting.
So
Wild.
I don't know what else I have to say about this film.
I do want to mention the thing about the casting,
Yeah.
of, you know, like, because one, like, the thing that got me like on this like thing of like, oh, like, you know, what was the casting of this film, because in that one scene where again Joe and Norma are having their movie night, like we see actual footage of the silent film they're watching. And so when I was seeing that, I'm just sort of like, is that Norma's actress? Like, is that one of her films? And so like afterwards, I like went up on Wikipedia, the most trusted source, and I sort of looked up, you know, like what was the casting for Sunset Boulevard. And what I came to discover is that essentially everybody is playing themselves. DeMille literally plays himself. Like they got the real DeMille to play DeMille, wacky. And then sort of like, and then Norma Desmond's actress was a silent film actress, and Sunset Boulevard was her return to the screen, which is really funny because, you know, Norma's whole arc is about trying to get herself back onto the screen. All of the, you know, like her silent film friends that Joe calls the waxworks, they were all played by very prominent silent film actors from the 20s, who I assume no longer really were active in their careers at the time, but they got him back for this one. Max was played by a real director who also did some acting roles in his time, who, you know, like much like Max, he was actually foreign, his accent is legitimate, and all of this stuff. And I was like looking at this and I'm just sort of like, Jesus Christ, like Billy Wilder, how were you able to like look these people in the eye after this? I feel like this whole movie was just calling them out.
I know. Actors who played Norma probably was like, is this how you view me? Trying to get
like,
hell of a comeback.
I saw some like quotes from her of sort of like, you know, because they didn't immediately get her. They've like shopped around the script to a few like old silent film actresses of being, you know, like, will you be interested in this role? And most of them said no because they felt a little bit insulted. And so when they found her, what was it, Gloria Steinem or something?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that was her name.
Gloria
like when they found her, they're sort of, well, yeah, it was Gloria, last name started with an S. I probably should have looked it up before. But when they got to her, they asked her, you know, like, oh, can you do a screen test for us just so we can be sure? And she was not happy that they asked her to do a screen test. She was like, I've done 20 films for Paramount. Like, why are you asking me to do a screen test? Literally just like Norma.
That is Norma.
Because Norma's like, I've done 12 films with DeMille. He's gonna take me back, darling. And she's like so confident, just like that. Like, I wonder if he wrote that in on purpose. Like, if he like finagled it to like reference that moment.
Like, that was another quote that I found of like, you know, there was definitely a lot of Norma and Gloria, and so, and then also a lot of the like the potential leads they tried to get, you know, like for Joe's part, they turned down the role because they're sort of like, I don't want to have a romance with an older woman. How dare you ask me to be romantic with an older woman on screen? It's scandalous.
I also think there's something to say about the emphasis on Norma loving to watch back her silent films and being obsessed with the lack of dialogue. And she's like, we just needed our faces. Like, she is truly a person obsessed with like the outside and like the appearances, and she doesn't dare ever to like dig deeper into what's really there in reality. And I think that's kind of like something present in both Gaslight and Sunset Boulevard as like noir, like Gothic movies. How like there's like one reality and then there's another one, and these characters are kind of towing the line between this world and that world. And that's kind of like, you know, you have like Norma in her world, and then you have like the real outside, and then you have Paula in the world that Gregory is fabricating for her, and then you have like the actual outside. So I think that's something that really ties together these two films and these two genres as like just in general that I noticed with like the whole like, I don't want to say like disillusionment, but this kind of hermetic creation of these like two parallel worlds by these characters. So
yeah. And I think one was, I think I've already said this like 5 times, but I think in Gaslight, the world was created to dismantle somebody, and in Sunset Boulevard, the world Max created for Norma was made to kind of like glue Norma together into reality for as long as possible. So one was done out of like, I hate Gregory. So I think it was out of pure evil. And then one was done out of like, I love you. Please just keep it together. Honey, please.
Like, the thing about Max is that I think he did genuinely love her, but at the same time, he also was an enabler, which Jill confronts him about. It's sort of like, you can't keep feeding her these lies because this isn't sustainable. And Jill recognizes that, but Max doesn't really know how to sort of like escape this delusion that he's created for her.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Max was a good guy. He just didn't know how to do it correctly, which is fine.
Poor Max.
Poor Max. Moral of the story is that Max deserved better.
If you're gonna be anyone from these films, be Max.
Be Max. And on that note, I don't know if anyone has anything else to say about these two films. I think that we had a pretty good discussion. Justice for Max. # justice for Max.
And the monkey.
Oh yeah, and I think it was a chimpanzee, but yeah.
Oh yeah, justice for the chimp and justice for Max.
And we
that's
already
the only thing that you need to take away from what we've said today.
Yeah, 2 facts today. We had the William Desmond Taylor case, which I'm going to be obsessing over all night tonight. And we had Daphne's fun fact about the actress who played Norma, which I think is also really cool. I didn't even put that together, like the comments.
That's so
and how they.
Seeing the quotes from her was really funny, and just sort of like all the weird anecdotes, like to be a fly on the wall during the filming of Sunset Boulevard.
I hope she yelled at him at least once. I hope she was like, how dare you? Call me.
Probably every scene.
Yeah. But yeah, this was a really great talk.
All right. I'll see you guys next week.
You guys.
Bye.